Yo, welcome to The Noob and the Knower. In this podcast, we pair a driven beginner with a seasoned vet to explain how to learn basically anything.
This season's anything is how to fly fish. Stick around as we cover the gamut, 101 to the 401, gear, reading water, fishing techniques, and much, much more.
With star of hit video series Modern Nymphing, Fly Fishing Team USA medalist, and professional guide Lance Egan.
That's right. And here co-hosting and asking the questions on your behalf is avid fly fisher and recently graduated noob, Pablo Signori.
So let's go. Together we'll take you from fishing zero
to fly angling hero faster than you can say, fish on.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Noob and the Knower podcast, Fly Fishing Edition, Season 1, Episode 5. That's right, we're back in the saddle, and today we're going to talk about something that's super important. Obviously, at this point, if you've listened to all the podcasts up until now, you have a very basic but good knowledge of how to fly fish, but we haven't really talked about finding fish and actually getting to the place where you can use all these skills that you've amassed up until now. So today we're going to talk about two things. We're probably going to do this in two parts. Part 1 is going to be finding fishable water. Part 2 is going to be finding fishable fish. That's kind of the breakdown of what's going to happen. Unfortunately, we don't have Ray here today, but we do have Mr. Lance Egan, the legend. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your sturgeon fishing that I saw on Instagram, just really quickly, because I'm curious.
Well, that wasn't fly fishing, but it was very legendary, even though I'm not a legend. But the sturgeon fishing was. It was really fun.
That looked insane.
It was really cool, yeah. We hired a guide since I don't know anything about it, and my son had a bucket list kind of fish for him was a sturgeon, so we decided to go north. I live in Utah, and we decided to travel up to Idaho and find some giant leviathan, old, ancient, prehistoric fish, and we did.
Yeah, they look like dinosaur fish. It's crazy.
They are very old. Yeah, they're really cool. You know, not really a fly fishing type of species because they're really reliant on scent to find food. But if you don't mind doing a little bait fishing and you enjoy catching fish that are 6 to 8 feet long, then sturgeon is for you.
That's crazy. That's insane.
They're cool.
If I'm not mistaken, that's actually so caviar comes from sturgeons in the Black Sea, right? So we can't call it caviar here unless it comes from that one region, I think.
It's a good question. I know that caviar comes from sturgeon. I don't know which species or if all species, are considered caviar. I'm not sure how that works, but it's their eggs, I believe, that it's the caviar, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like you can do fish eggs that are sturgeon, but it's not caviar unless it comes from a very specific place in the world. It's kind of like champagne, It's like champagne has to come from Champagne, France. Otherwise, it's just sparkling white wine.
Since I don't eat caviar and I don't drink champagne, I know nothing about either of those things.
Fair enough. Well, I try and keep it classy here on my end in Chicago, so
it's a little too high rent for me.
Fair enough. So let's talk about finding fishable water. This is one thing that I think that a lot of people have a hard time with. Everyone just kind of goes to like their local pond or like whatever they see, or they've heard there's fish there. Here in Chicago, a lot of people will try and fish off the harbor, but I tend to feel like it's usually kind of unsuccessful. Most of the people are doing like bobber fishing and stuff like that. I mean, there's some people that definitely know what's going on, but it's a lot of bobber fishing and just kind of like you don't really see them pulling a lot of fish.
Sure.
And I think a big part of that is because they haven't been taught how to find fish and find fishable water. So today we're going to talk a bit about that, and everyone's pretty close to a piece of water, I would say. For the most part, if you live in the United States, you're like within 45 minutes of something that you can fish. Usually, yeah. Usually, I think you're closer. I mean, people overlook a lot of fishable water, and that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later.
Especially if you're not particular about your species, right? If you're pretty open to catch several different species, there's always something near you to catch.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I was going to say is that, not everyone's near trout water. That's a little bit more sparse, but if you're trying to learn fly fishing, a good way to learn is actually by fishing for like panfish and bass and other species. So, and those types of warm water species are pretty much like abundant across the country.
Right.
No matter where you live. They're stocked all over the place and they're really fun.
Very fun, yeah.
Smallmouth fishing also is just like a huge thing in fly fishing.
Yeah,
I would say it's probably the number 2, wouldn't you?
I don't know what the number 2 is. They're definitely very popular sport fish. Having worked worked in fishing tackle for a long time, I think a lot of anglers think that fly fishing is only for trout. A lot of people that are new to the sport are blown away that you can fly fish in salt water and that you can fly fish for bass and you can, all these other species that are largely, maybe except for sturgeon.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I know some people even catch the odd sturgeon on a fly. I think it's mostly probably by accident, but it is possible. I've seen some.
No, I target them.
I'm sure you do. You do unsuccessfully, but you do target them.
That's right, exactly. Whoa, Lance. Yeah, but it's true. It's like if you're willing to not just fish for trout, you have a lot of opportunities, at least in this country, and I would probably assume in other places of the world too. And so today we're going to kind of talk about these places that do hold fish, different types of bodies of water, lakes, rivers, streams, ponds, reservoirs, beaches, bays. All of those are fishable, and knowing what has fish is the first step, right? Knowing where they're at in that is the second step. So if you're trying to figure out where you can go fish, where there's actually fish to catch, the first place that I would say, and Lance, please feel free to interject at any moment, but I would say go to your local fly shop. And that's just because they should have it dialed, and most likely they do, and it's what they do for a living. And also it's good to support them because it keeps our sport alive and thriving. So
keeps you a place to go get tackle and knowledge.
Knowledge is key.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they're there for. So, some people don't want to go to a local fly shop and ask questions because typically you have to spend money to do that. But, you buy a few flies, maybe a couple leaders, tippet, spool, whatever, and ask the guys, and they'll usually help you out. For me, as a noob, that was actually like one of the resources that really, really helped me. And that's how I got to know Ray, actually, because I was going into Orvis and asking him questions. And I took the 101 class, too, that they have at Orvis. So it was like you start to develop a community of people that you can rely on, that you can trust, and that have valuable knowledge as to where the fish are.
Right.
And Lance works in a fly shop. So if you're in the Orem, Utah area, you can go visit him, and he will definitely be a good resource to tell you where you can go for fish. Although I'm sure in Utah, you can probably just spit, hit a fish.
Well, there are plenty of places to catch fish for sure.
Going along with that was kind of just connecting with people, and there's a bunch of different ways to do it. But if you can think outside the box and kind of ask people, there's probably a bunch of beginners wanting to learn this, and if you guys get together, the information just it's exponential. So if you can find people to fish with, that's super, super helpful also. So there's forums and all sorts of stuff that people use to talk about fishing.
Yeah, I think there's lots of good ways to do that. One is to get involved with your local fishing groups. So there are oftentimes fly fishing clubs, whether they're Trout Unlimited clubs or there are Federation of Fly Fishers types of clubs, which has changed names. I always forget that now. They're called something else. But Fly Fishers International, I think, is their new thing. FFI clubs. Anyway, there's different types.
I thought it was We Are Fly Fishers.
There's that too, probably.
That's the club I started.
We even had a fly fishing club in my high school when I was younger.
What was that called?
I don't remember what the name. It's just Alta High School Fly Fishing Club.
Hey guys, fly guys.
Super Fishing Nerds Club is what it should have been called.
That's awesome.
There are lots of ways to get involved there, and it seems like, at least here in my state, there are several clubs that, they have monthly meetings where they usually have a speaker that's teaching something or helping you learn about a particular fishery or about a particular type of fish. They oftentimes have conservation type outings where it might take you putting in a little elbow grease, but going and planting some willows or doing a river cleanup or something like that. But you're going to meet people in the process and kind of become one of the group. And once you're kind of they can be a little bit cliquey for sure, but once you kind of they're not it's not like high school cliquey.
Cool kid alert.
It's all adults, so everybody's pretty cool usually. But once you kind of get in and get to know some people, then they oftentimes organize fishing excursions and group fishing events, and people start talking at the events about where they've been fishing lately, and you can pick up tips and ideas and flies and all kinds of stuff by just joining a conservation group.
Yeah, and I don't think it only pertains to adults. I think if you're younger, you can join these groups too. It's just you have to go with your parents, but
for sure, absolutely,
they're super helpful. I actually went to when I was living in LA, Orange County has a fly fishing group, and I actually went to go see Devin do his presentation, and I had never been to one of those before, and I was really surprised. It was very cool. They did a raffle. I won a fly box, which was kind of sick. And then I don't usually win things. It's kind of actually a joke amongst anyone who knows me because my email has like 10,000 unread emails, and it's because I sign up for like every single raffle ever. I just like, I'm reckless abandon. I'm the opposite of what everyone does. I'm just like, yep, this is a raffle. I'm signing up. Just take my email. Do whatever you want with it.
And no success, huh?
Not usually. No, but I did win the fly box. That was pretty sick.
That's cool.
And then I was listening to Ask About Fly Fishing Radio, and they do raffles every time.
Right.
It's another podcast, and I won on there too. It was sick. It was like the Fly Tying Journal. I got a year subscription.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm that guy. And what was cool about that when I went to that fly club was that they all kind of talked about fly fishing before and after the presentation. There was a guy even that was like, hey, you know, I just got access to private water.
Oh, cool.
If you have a float tube, I'm trying to get 2 more people to come with me. We already have 4. We're all going to float tube this like really sick bass lake. And I was like, this is insane. Like people just like talk about this. I don't know. It's kind of crazy. It's like when I went to music school, it's like, wait, all these people do music too? Because you kind of feel like you're on an island. You know what I mean?
I'm not the only music nerd. There's others.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of cool. That's one of the things that you guys can definitely look into finding out in your area because it is quite helpful. The next thing I would mention is obviously, it goes without saying, but the internet is your friend. There's so much information online.
Tons.
I mean, it's just abundant and it can be kind of daunting at times, but I think if you're willing to put in a little bit of time and do a little bit of research, it's quite helpful. Simple Google search like, where can I fish in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, fly fishing near name a city, name a town.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And there's always something. There's also that DIY that I don't know who the guy who started it, but they kind of like started through the nation and like amassing all this information about where you can fly fish. And not only here, like in Mexico and stuff. When I went to Mexico 2 years ago, planned on just fishing off the beach, and it was super helpful. That site kind of told you what to expect and all sorts of stuff. I ended up buying a book, and yeah, it's a pretty sick site. But that's one of the things you can do. And if you're Googling, you know, you start with your region, you just put fly fishing, and then just go down the wormhole. That's kind of how that works.
Right.
And there's a lot to be found there. And you also found those forums, and that's also how you meet people. So
right, yeah, there are internet forums. You kind of I think touched on this one a little bit, but there's social media groups as well. You know, like Facebook has a bunch of fly fishing groups. There are some that are nationwide, worldwide. There are fly tying specific groups. There are, you know, specific for your area. You know, Utah fly fishers or that
fly
kind of stuff.
Fly tying with Uncle Cheech.
Fly tying with Uncle Cheech. Yep, there's that kind of a fly tying group. All kinds of good stuff that's on social media as well. So you know the internet. You know, all connected to the crazy interwebs, but yeah, lots of good resources on there.
Yeah, it's true. And going along with that, this is something that is kind of interesting. I don't think that many people know about it in the fly fishing scope, but there's a bunch of apps that will give you information. That DIY one, they have an app, and I've used it a couple times. All of these, you create an account. Some of them you have to pay, but some of them you can just do like the beginner tier or whatever, like introduction tier, and you don't
free version.
Yeah, exactly. Again, a lot of it's not fly centric, but at the end of the day, you're just trying to catch fish. It doesn't matter who caught what, where, with what. You're just trying to find where the fish are. So they're actually quite helpful. And even if you are listening to this and you have fly fished for a while, I would say check out these apps because there's something to be learned from them.
Yeah, just being exposed to more fisheries and more people talking about it will give you places to fish for sure.
I just wanted to pop back in here with an addendum regarding these fishing apps. I've had the pleasure of talking with Zach from Trout Routes, and he kind of enlightened me a bit about a situation that I was not aware of because I'm not the type of person that does this. But one of the caveats of these fishing apps is spot burning. And spot burning is when you see someone else's spot on social media and then you go to that spot and you fish it. The objective of using these apps is not to spot burn. The objective is to find places that you know have fish and the type of species, and then find a different spot on that river to fish. People put in a lot of work and time and even pass down from generation to generation their fishing spots, and you want to be a mindful angler and not take advantage of that. You just want to use it as a reference. That's actually what I really like about the Trout Routes app, is that you can't spot burn with that app. It's actually made to not allow you to do that. So in the end, all these apps are useful, but just don't be the person that spot burns. That's all. Let's get back to it. Moving along, and this one kind of I feel like is a no-brainer, but it is actually on the internet. Before, I don't know how they used to do it, because I mean, it must have been the Wild West. I bet the fishing was a lot less pressured when you had to go out there and just figure it out on your own. But
True.
But you should check out the parks in your area. There's government websites with national parks or parks, and they just lay it all out for you. They're like, these are the species we stock. This is what you can use.
Parks.
There's even
National parks, yeah.
It's all laid out. In New York, I know if you live in the state of New York, I've used it for the Rochester area, but you can see what creeks get stocked when and what fish are in there, and they kind of give you like a rough little breakdown of like what to use, even for fly fishing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of practical. It's definitely like super, super, super basic as far as like, it's just like blanketed statements that probably don't apply all the time, but it's a nice way to like at least get a feel for it,
Yeah, it's a starting point. A lot of the websites from like the Fish and Game or the Division of Natural Resources or that sort of thing, Fish and Wildlife, every state calls it something different, but they usually have websites that have all that information you're talking about, stocking info, fresh fishing reports oftentimes, and even sometimes even teamed with suggestions on what to use. Also a good resource.
And then actually, going along with that, the fishing report thing, you can Google that too. Orvis actually has one that covers a lot of states in the country and a lot of multiple rivers for each state. I would say that the ones that they talk about are probably like the most fished places, and they tend to be very trout centric, but they're definitely a good resource. I was in Pennsylvania this weekend visiting my sister, and she has this creek that's right behind her house called the Yellow Breeches. Pretty well known fishery in Pennsylvania, and it's on the Orvis list, which means it's very well known, at least in Pennsylvania. But you can go there, and it gives you kind of a rough idea of like the water temperature, what to use. It's like a guide who just kind of gives you a suggestion for free of like, okay, try this, fish at this time, yada yada yada. And it's up to you if you want to listen, but I would say if you're starting out, it's a great place to start. And now, a word from our sponsors.
From the vise to the boat, to the bank, to those moments you connect to a fish, Loon Outdoors is with you every step of the way, with tools designed at the bench and on the water to help make your best day on the water better.
The other thing that I think that is a good kind of sneaky way to find things out about fisheries is listening to podcasts, actually. Not just ours, but there's a bunch of fishing podcasts, and
for sure,
some of them are like very regional or location based. Actually, I am right here. I have a book that I recently bought on the trout waters of Wisconsin.
Trout waters of the Cheeseheads.
And it's just maps, that's all it is. But I found out about that by listening to a podcast about the Driftless area. And man, is that book just crazy.
I'm sure
nuts.
It's awesome.
It's really good. I mean, it doesn't even really say anything. It's just maps, So it's pretty cool. It tells you where you can find fish in the Driftless. Fishable fish in the Driftless, and what land you can go on and what land you can, all sorts of stuff.
Before the interwebs, the famous internet that we have now these days that people use every once in a while, we relied heavily on books.
Did he say books? Gross.
And on magazine articles would kind of have, features on a standout fishery, and several, most magazines would have them on. In each issue, they'd have, one or two from the east, one or two from the Midwest, a couple from the west, and maybe a saltwater destination or something like that. And those are still available. There's still good magazine articles out all the time, some in paper version, some digital copies these days. And then books like you've got right there are a great resource and something you can take with you in the truck. When you don't have internet access anymore, you still have a book. They're still quite handy.
And there's actually like a whole series of fly fishing in. I actually was listening to a podcast that had the guy who did it, which is kind of nuts because he wrote kind of like the premier book on marlin fishing.
Oh, wow.
And then he's like a New Yorker, I think. He randomly decided that he wanted to do something about brook trout. And so he wrote this brook trout book, which obviously is like the polar opposite of in the fishing spectrum.
Right.
And he fell in love with another book that had all these images, and there was like a certain size of the book. So he told the publisher that he wanted to make his book that way.
Cool.
And it was like a huge fight, and it wasn't a fight, but they were like, man, you're trying to make your book like so expensive. He ended up convincing them, and then it was such a hit that they basically made a series of books covering a bunch of different states and where you can find fishable water in all these states, which now, if you just Google on Amazon books or something, the first books that come up are like from the series. And I've bought a few of them. I have like, at this point, I think I have Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, California.
Yeah, it's like the Fly Fisher's Guide to.
Exactly, yes. And they're awfully good. It sucks because if everyone gets these books, then you're going to places where everyone's going to be. But there's tricks to this because you can kind of find the rivers that they're talking about, and then you can use your own ingenuity to find the tributaries, which are like little streams that come off the main river.
Yeah. Or lesser known access points, or
exactly
upper or lower sections of the same river. Absolutely.
And that's where the next thing that we should talk about comes in, which is Google Maps, GPS. I would say that for me is probably my number one way to find fish is by using Google Maps. Especially here in Chicago, it's just like I'm basically zooming out and looking for anything blue and then zooming in and kind of checking out what it's like.
I see.
Then I switch to satellite image and you can kind of get a picture of what's happening in the fishery. Sometimes it's really hard because there's like a bunch of trees and it's like a summertime satellite image, so you can't really see the river. But like in California, where they don't have like dense deciduous forests, you can really see where the riffles are. I mean, it's great. It's like you can decide where you want to fish just based on satellite imagery. I started doing it also for Argentina because I'm going to be going there to visit my family at the end of the year. So I'm like, okay, I got to figure out where I'm going to go fish. And it really gives you a lot of information. So what we're going to do in the next part of this is we're going to tell you where to find fish within these fisheries. And when you're using these GPS things, you can look for these features that we'll be talking about when you're using the maps.
Perfect.
I don't know if that's how you do it, Lance, but that's been kind of a really fun way to think about fishing when I'm not fishing, is actually scoping out places and trying to find new uncharted land,
Online. Yeah, I've done a bunch of that for sure. I'm just old enough to, as I'm sure you are, since you're just a couple of years younger than I am, but maybe 3 years. We don't need to count exactly, but
yep, 23.
Yeah, just old enough to, the internet didn't exist when I was younger, right? So when we were younger. So a lot of my early fishing was get out the atlas and look for little blue lines and...
Oh, wait, hold on. My pager's going off?
Yeah, exactly. Your beeper.
My beeper's going off?
Yep, I never did have a pager. That was not something. My job never required a pager. Thank goodness.
Well, a lot of people that I was friends with in high school had pagers, and they didn't have jobs that required them either.
It was just cool. Well, I was never cool. I was a fishing nerd, so not much has changed. Anyway, yeah, but we just picked out the atlas. We picked up the atlas. Looked for a blue line that we'd never visited before. Put some gas in the tank and go and see. And sometimes it was a wash, and sometimes it was really good. Sometimes it was an intermittent river that didn't have water all year, and sometimes it was bigger than you thought and had consistent cold flows all year long. So there's an element of that. I kind of enjoy that sometimes. Not that I wouldn't use current technologies available, because I certainly would, and do Google Maps and that kind of stuff. But there's an element of fun, adventure too, and just kind of picking something that you've never been to and not even learning too much about it. Because where I live, the larger rivers, if you can call them that, and Utah's a pretty dry state, so our large rivers in many places would be small rivers, but we have a handful of medium-sized rivers, let's call them, a couple of bigger rivers, and then we have tons of small creeks that a lot of which, if you drove over them on a highway or something, if you blink, you'd miss them because they're covered in a canopy of trees and that kind of stuff, and many of them don't even make it to a highway. They get piped or whatever else, so you'd have to go up a canyon. But you go to those little places and you never know whether they're going to be amazing or they're going to be terrible, but they're fun to go explore, and that you can't always tell a lot on Google Maps. Like you're talking, you wouldn't be able to see where the riffles are. You would just be able to see whether there's a road to access it or not. Right. And around here, that's a really fun thing to do, to just go chase some. They're not usually big fish, but small fish in small streams.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. The exploration is kind of like it makes you feel like a kid again. You're just like in the middle of nowhere trying to find this like buried treasure type feeling. It's kind of amazing. Mm-hmm. I'm also a nerd, in case you haven't noticed, proudly. Settlers of Catan, though, that's
that was your speed.
I'm down with that. Family board game night, I'm down with that.
Domination.
But yeah, anyways, going back to what we were talking about, I think it is really fun to explore. And some people don't like doing that because there's a chance that you won't catch fish. But I think that once you kind of get used to fishing and you're confident in what you're doing, it's a very rewarding thing to do, because you're going and you're finding this place that's kind of like feels like it's just yours. You know
Agreed.
What I mean?
Yeah, very rewarding. And not only that, I would argue it's very helpful in your learning process of becoming a fly fisher, I would say that the anglers that I've worked with for some of them 10, 15, 20 years that go to the same river, the same hole every single time they fish, they really do not know how to fly fish. And
that makes sense.
They do. I'm being a little harsh. They know how to catch some fish in that particular spot, but you take them out of that little comfort zone and they are a fish out of water. They don't know what to do. And just being able to adapt, learning how you attack the tiny stream versus a medium-sized river versus a large river is a skill. And if you never expose yourself to those different types of fishing, you are limiting your experience level and your adaptability, and therefore you're catching less fish overall as you go and explore new places. On the flip side, some people would argue, I only have so much time. If I keep going to the same spot, I have consistent success. And if they love that, there's nothing wrong with it. It's all just for fun anyway. But most people I find like the adventure. They like getting out and mixing things up a little bit.
For instance, for my birthday last year, we rented this it was like a glamping cabin. I may have told you this story already, but I'm going to repeat it because I'll make it quicker this time though. But I was looking behind this thing and I was like, man, there's a river, and I know this river has trout in it because I've fished it like way up where like everyone else does. And this was like miles way in a different spot. It was still like kind of up in the mountains though. So I was like, I'm going to try and get to this thing. There was no path, no trail, no nothing. And I started looking at, like, as you can see, there's certain map apps that will show you altitude and stuff like that. I used Gaia GPS for that, but there's a multitude of them. You can just Google search that. But I started looking at like the height and how far I was going to have to like hike down.
Drop in, yeah.
So it was like 1,000 feet. And I was like, I could do this. This isn't so bad. So I just literally put my stuff on in the morning. We were there for 2 days. So the second day I just woke up super, super early and just geared up and I had my fly rod in my tube and I just like walked straight into the woods, straight down and
dropped in.
It wasn't super easy. Like there was a lot of like boulder hopping and stuff and like some kind of dicey, very steep parts that I had to like navigate. But then I got to the river and it was beautiful. And I'm like almost positive no one had ever fished there. If they did, it was like very, very, very few people because there was no way to actually get there except for like going to this crazy backcountry scenario. And I went in there and it was amazing. I caught a bunch of golden trout, which that was my goal. My goal was to catch golden trout.
Sweet.
And it was my first time fishing on a really, really small creek. So it was super fun. I was fishing dry flies the whole time. And I just learned so much about fishing, even just that style, on my own. It was like I didn't listen to a podcast about it. I just kind of taught myself when I was there. And it was so rewarding, The hike back kind of sucked because it was straight up. What's crazy is I went down there and it was like 3.5 hours and I got back and it was like 10 a.m. or something, and I like walked up to my wife. I'm like, hey, what's going on? I'm covered in dust. And I was like, that was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had in my life. But you put yourself through these things and it tests so much about who you are that when you come out of it, it's so rewarding.
Yeah, you could have been walking back up that hill with no success, wondering what in the heck did I just waste my time doing? But instead, you got down in there, battled through it, and had an amazing time and adventure and never forget. And that makes that hike out so easy. So
exactly,
you're just so energetic.
I was very pumped.
Yeah, for sure.
So we did spend a little bit of time on this, but I think, it's worth it. It's worth, making the extra effort if you want to kind of check out these places that are maybe off the beaten path. The other thing I wanted to mention about, people being around fishy places is if you live on the East or the West Coast, you can fish off the beach or off piers. Pier fishing thing with a fly rod, depending on how high the pier is
could be a little daunting.
It can be a little tough. I mean, some of the piers that we had in Southern California, they're just, they're like 80 feet above the water and stuff. Yeah. It's kind of tough. But surf fishing is really fun. It's kind of intimidating for a lot of people when they first try and get into it. I can understand why, because I had that issue too. But there's a lot of YouTube videos that will teach you kind of the gear that you need. Almost always you're going to want some sort of sinking line unless you're doing like flats fishing or something because of the wave action. Depending on the fish you're chasing, 8 weight to maybe a 12 weight or something. I don't know if you would actually fish a 12 weight off the beach, but maybe like a double-handed rod would be a good one.
I know I once chased some tarpon off of like jetties in Texas.
That's
unsuccessfully, but we saw some, and I don't think the size of the tarpon we saw there, I don't know if you need a 12 necessarily, but you definitely wouldn't want anything lighter than a 10.
Okay.
And there are some of them that were, 100, 150 pound fish that a 12 would probably be very applicable for.
Crazy. That's really cool. That's what I'm talking about. Like you can walk out on the beach and there's a chance you'll be catching fish. And I think a big part of it is, and we're going to get into this on part 2, is knowing how to read that water so you know where the fish actually are. There's a really good guy that I'm going to talk about later in the second part that has some YouTube videos on how to approach a beach and surf fishing, but it's a great way to catch fish. Actually, my brother, who had never done this before, we kind of got him dialed last summer when he was renting a house in Montauk for like a month during the whole pandemic thing.
Oh wow,
it's crazy. We kind of got him dialed, and I sent him to some YouTube videos. This kid was catching like 2 to 3 stripers every day for a month.
Cow. That's
cool. It was nuts. It was like lights out fishing, and he had the best time. Actually, he thinks that he like injured his thumb from stripping so much. Like he still says he has like nerve damage,
tendonitis or something going in it.
Yeah, but he's not like some like pro angler. He'd actually never really done that, but he had a great time, and he was very successful. So there's definitely options for people. No matter where you live, you just kind of have to think outside the box a little bit and not be so glued to like, oh well, everyone fishes at Walden Lake, so that's where I have to go. Just think a little bit outside of that, which leads me to the next thing that I think is also a big one. It reminds me when I used to skateboard, where like you would walk down the street or you'd be driving with your parents and you're like, oh, that'd be a good place to hit. That's a good place to hit. That's a good place to hit. If you start paying attention when you're driving around town, you're going to start seeing bodies of water, and the more you know about fishing, the more you're going to realize that there's fish in there. A big one would be like golf courses. They tend to sometimes have fish in them, in the ponds and stuff. Mm-hmm. And you probably know a lot more about this than I do, but from my understanding is, in order to keep a body of water healthy, you kind of have to have some animals in there to keep it kind of going naturally. Is that correct, or is that not true?
I don't know enough about to say either. I would speculate that if there's enough oxygen in there to keep fish alive, then yeah, it could probably help things. There's certain species of fish that eat, like a lot of golf courses have things like grass carp and stuff like that in their ponds to try and keep the weed growth down, and they oftentimes put I guess depends on where you live in the country, but there's often, like you say, bass and bluegill in those ponds. Locally here in some of our more foothill or mountain courses, they have trout in some of the ponds. That's a possibility. A lot of them don't let you fish them, but if you have access to it, if you can get it, you find somebody on the course or at the club that you get an in with, and maybe early morning, late evening, after hours, before hours, you can sneak on there.
Yeah, exactly. They're great places to practice casting also.
That's one thing that I am not as a golf nerd, so I've always said that golf courses are a huge waste of water, except that the water features on the golf courses are really interesting for a fisherman. And
I've had quite some luck in golf courses. I found a secret spot that I will not reveal, but it holds tarpon in South Carolina. And we tend to go there every year, and I've seen, like, it's basically it flooded and a bunch of juvenile tarpon got in and haven't been able to get out. So I caught.
How long do they live?
That I don't know, but like 3 years ago I saw a 4-foot tarpon in there.
Oh wow!
Tried to catch it, unsuccessful, and then like 2 years ago I caught one.
Cool.
It was so sick. I mean, it's a small pond. It doesn't have a lot of room to run, and they're crazy fish. So it was pretty fun.
It just went airborne?
Yeah, it was not happy. It was not happy at all.
Yeah, that's way cool. You can send coordinates to that one and to me after the show's over. Or you could just put them in the show notes. Everybody would like to know, Pablo.
Yeah. No.
Not going to happen.
If you're listening to this and you have access to something that I might like, you can send me that and I'll do a trade. But that's about it.
You scratch his back, he scratches yours.
Yeah, exactly. Like grass-fed beef or fine wine.
It doesn't even have to be a
coffee.
fishery, just something.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I'm flexible. And so, paying attention to kind of what's around you when you're driving. And, even I look at all these buildings that have these like big ponds with like the big fountains in them. I'm like, I bet there's fish in there. You just have to go kind of search, don't get yourself into trouble. Don't trespass. But a lot of people are pretty chill about it. They don't really care. So, just be respectful and go out there and fish. And if nothing else, especially if you're a noob, it's good to practice casting on these locations also. So find yourself some water, get out there and fish and have a good time, All right, yeah, so I think we've done a pretty good job of talking about finding fishable water. Not all water is going to be fishable, but there is a lot out there.
Totally.
So stick around for the next part 2 of this, which is going to be actually finding the fish within that water, because fish tend to hang out in certain places. There's a way to actually find them. That's the difference, I think, between people that are really good at fishing and people that are not. They can actually go to a piece of water and be like, there's a fish there. And that's how a lot of good anglers approach water. It's not like they're like hoping, they're actually hunting.
Yeah, they're expecting fish to be in particular places.
In the infamous words of Kelly Gallup, don't hope fish, hunt fish. That's kind of what we're talking about in the next podcast in part 2 of this. How do I find places to fish? Part 2 will be finding fishable fish, and we look forward to sharing that with you. Thanks a lot, Lance.
Yep.
Thanks for your input and your musk and your impeccable podcasting skills.
My fish nerdiness.
All right, y'all. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for listening to The Noob and the Knower, Season 1, Episode 5.
Adios.
This was a Raul Maria production.
Pause for doggy rescue time.